What's the worst thing that's happened to one of your friends? Tried to swim to shore from a sailboat in Lake Michigan. She was a strong swimmer, but even in the summer hypothermia is a threat. They didn't find her body for several weeks, and during that time famous fake psychic Sylvia F. King Brown told the family she was alive and being held on a boat against her will. Still miss you, Julie. A friend in high school was hit by a car and dragged a couple of 100 yards before he died. The driver was drunk and on coke. It was 8 AM when it happened. My friend was on his way to school. He and his brother were away at college. His father fell asleep with a cigar in hand, and the house began to burn. So far as could be determined, the father woke, went to get his wife, carried her downstairs, and made it to within a couple feet of the door. They both died, and the house was destroyed. Went swimming in a lake and got tangled in a bunch of weeds and drowned. R.I.P. Dan. She worked as a bartender and her fiance came in drunk out of his mind and acting strange. She had to tell him she couldn't serve him. He left upset. She went home a few hours later and found him trying to abuse her teen daughter. My friend fought him. He cut open her face from forehead to chin. She said she could see her own facial bones. He held them hostage for hours. She knocked him out with a bat and carried her daughter, banging on all the neighbors' doors. Finally someone opened up and got the cops. He was on the run for a while but finally caught. Her piece of it ex-fiance was sentenced to 58 years. She has a huge deep scar on her face. Her daughter is still a sweet young lady who has kept a positive mindset. He was helping an elderly couple with chores around the house to help support his new family. They had 2 adult children. They were both in town at the time. The son shot his sister, his parents, and then my friend, and put the gun in his hand and pinned it all on him. Didn't take long to prove who done it, but not after his name was tarnished. Edit. So this is what they mean by blowing up overnight. A few repeated questions. The only survivor was the son. The police figured it out soon enough because of GSR and no defensive wounds. I still don't know why he did it. My friend's family is a wreck. His mom took his child, the GF didn't care from what I know, and went back to her home country because her son and grandson were the only family she had. Yes, I live in America. Few people in the comments narrowed it down further, but I will not. I also have 2 more stories. Story 1. A cable guy went crazy and raped a mom in front of her kids and then set the house on fire. Only the mom survived. The daughter I knew almost make it out. She was found half in and half out of a window. Story 2. A friend was at a house party when another friend came over to the house and shot him point blank in the head. Dozens of witnesses. He ditched the gun a few blocks away and they found him 3 states away 2 days later. He is still on trial for that one. Finished a workout at the gym and collapsed on his way out. Brain aneurysm. He was dead 6 days later. My friend had another good friend of ours die in his arms after being shot 3 times from a drive-by. Even to this day, 9 years later, he feels like that they were meant for him and lives with some guilt. In high school, a friend of mine was stopped at an intersection when some lady rear-ended him. She was being with her phone and didn't even slow down. This pushed his vehicle through the intersection and pinned a girl waiting for the bus against a telephone pole, where she died. She was cycling through London and a bus hit her so hard she came off, landed on head, and died. She was also quite literally the last member of her family. Both her parents were only childs and had both died of cancer, and she had no siblings. Her death was the end of her family tree. She was 23. I had a friend who I went through elementary school and middle schools with. He moved away in the middle of 7th grade and our friend group was heartbroken, but figured we'd see him again. Last week, he was shot in the head by his friend who was showing him a gun and pointed it at him as a joke. He was 18. My friend was found after not breathing for 10+ minutes. They got his heart started again and he lived for a few more years, but he never walked or talked again. 2 of my good friends, twins, got in a car accident. They were upside down in a wooded area. The one brother died instantly, while the other was upside down for 3 hours until someone saw their car. I miss you. A friend of mine was murdered, shot 14 times. He was left for dead on somewhat remote road. He was 15. My best friend was shot point blank in the head by her husband and then he killed himself. She survived with no long-term damage. He died of a seizure in the middle of the night. The worst part was he was going to see a neurologist the next day about his sudden onset of seizures. R.I.P. Tommy. There's a really good friend of mine that was driving his girlfriend at the time and got hit by a drunk driver. Only fatality of that accident was my friend's GF. It's been about 10-15 years and he still doesn't drive. That it destroyed him. He is still a happy dude, but it isn't the same for real. Just broke. She killed herself after she found out she was pregnant. We hadn't even been out of high school for a year. I couldn't go to her funeral because I was training in the army. I still dream about her sometimes. I miss you, Nicole. One of my friends was sliding down a railing that was next to a ground storm drain made of concrete. He slipped backwards and cracked his skull open. It was near midnight and we were pretty close to a hospital, so I just kinda picked him up and ran. I hope I never see the inside of someone's head up close again. Edit. Since people keep asking me if my friend is still alive. He isn't, is doing much better. Murdered by an unknown person. There was some extremely shady shit going on at the time. They found her dead in bed with the front door wide open. 28 years on. I still miss her so much. People who break into cars are generally not the kind of people with well-documented, traceable identities. They're at the bottom. And the good ones can get it done without leaving a meaningful trace. Anyway. So they don't have much to lose and can get away with anything. So if you're like my friend, and you see someone breaking into your car at 1 AM behind a strip mall with no cameras, you shouldn't get involved. But if you were my friend that night, you decide to confront the bastard, and you get stabbed to death, and there are no leads. One of my friends just lost her almost 2-year-old child in a drowning accident. She's utterly devastated. One's parents were in a tour plane crash in Hawaii. Another one's parents went off a cliff in a jeep in Hawaii. Vacations. One of my best friends in high school was murdered when he opened the back door of the Little Caesars we worked for when someone knocked. It was after closing on a Sunday, and he probably expected it to be one of our friends coming by to toke up. He was one of the coolest, most chill guys you'd ever meet, and he took a shotgun to the face that night. Worse still, cocksuckers who did it got off on a technicality. A good friend of mine was shot in the head by an ex-boyfriend. She lived for a few days until her parents took her off life support. The ex holed up in his apartment and went into a standoff until he killed himself. I love you, Elena. Me and my 3 other friends were longboarding down this highway and suddenly one of my friend crashed into a tree head first. For some reason his helmet went off before impact. We managed to get him to a hospital as fast as possible. He suffered itch, went into a coma and died 2 hours later. This happened 4 years ago, the 28th of May. He broke several bones as a child. At age 9 he was hit by a car and shattered his pelvis. Then in school on the first day of 5th grade he fell off the monkey bars and broke both arms in a gruesome manner. A few winters back my friend was driving and merged uphill onto an interstate overpass. He hit a patch of black ice on the ramp and went into a skid. His truck ending up slamming parallel into the guardrail and he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He's a big dude, college football player at the time, and the force of the impact sent him clean through the driver door and off the overpass. He fell 40 feet and landed on the highway below that he just left. Amazingly, no spinal or cerebral damage, but basically the whole left side of his body was shattered. Pelvis, elbow, 5 ribs were all broken. Huge hole in his diaphragm, torn urethra. He was in a bad way. 3 weeks of medically induced coma and 8 procedures later he pulled through. 8 months after that the madman made it back on the football field for his senior year of college. Practically a cyborg at that point with all of the hardware in his body. Doctors are pretty sure he only lived because he was in such good shape at the time of the accident. He always wears his seatbelt now. Should you? Cut up in pieces by her husband, then hidden in box of dirt on the balcony. A good friend of mine has a sister that lived in the southern US. We're in NY. One day she gets a call that the sister had a bad accident, was in a coma, and probably wouldn't make it. She, along with other family members, go down to see her. Well, she wakes up. At that point her husband told the family they had to leave. The family figured all along that the husband did it. History of abuse. and they figured that the sister would tell what happened and that's why husband made them leave. Eventually sister tells them to leave because she's controlled by her husband. Fast forward to now and sister is here in NY, having left the husband, with her young daughter. She did finally admit that he did it, but I don't know the details and I don't know if he's been charged with a crime. But she's left with a wobbly gait and no real speech. She has a very low mumble. What's interesting is that the daughter is speaking 3 languages, English, Spanish, her family's native language, and mumble. She imitates her mother's speech. It's kinda sweet actually. And most importantly, she and her mom are safe. A friend of mine's father dropped dead in the middle of her sister's 5th birthday party. 1 minute eating cake and playing games. Dead on the floor the next. It was a blood clot or an aneurysm. After he died, her mom tried to get custody of the 3 kids. She was a terrible mom who had lost full custody years earlier. Thankfully tons of family were able to help out and her stepmom, who is a fantastic person, finally got custody. While dealing with all of this, she relied heavily on her high school boyfriend. He was then diagnosed with leukemia and was dead within 6 months of her father. Thankfully she had a great therapist at the time. Stepmom paid for it even before dad passed to help deal with the trauma from her mom. She's now in her early 30s and has become a therapist herself. My friend was murdered by a psychopath. She set fire to his apartment which had no fire escape. Killed his wife, his 2-year-old son and his niece and nephew, both 5 and 7. She went drink in a bar after the attack and was laughing about it. She's in prison now and hopefully she will leave in a body bag. It's hard to say what's the worst. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma and many of my childhood friends have died well before their time. One of them was murdered execution style after a bad business deal surrounding a music video. Another forgot to put the parking brake on while making a quick repair on a derrick and it rolled back on him and crushed his head. Another disappeared after a tour in Iraq. Just called his wife to say he couldn't come home because he had murdered children. A lot of the ones that are still alive are in prison or in and out of rehab. I've gone through a few things that seemed awful but I've been very lucky to avoid the worst of it, I think. Jesus, thread man. Makes you realize how lucky you are sometimes. Died racing motocross and left 3 kids and a wife behind. Greatest guy I ever met. When I was little, a friend of mine died on the operating table from a long-term illness concerning her bowels. I don't know if I knew she was sick or not. It was tragic. And my first experience with death. I was in 3rd grade. Her name was Jenny. She was a victim of domestic abuse. Her parents didn't treat her well because she is their daughter and not their son. She received daily beatings throughout middle school. She is doing a lot better now. Have a loving boyfriend and is doing her masters. Let him crash at ours when he was between places. While I was out he got drunk and tried to bully my wife into having sex with him. He told her, if you don't I will tell him you did and he will believe me. She suggested he go get some beers first and then locked the doors. Hid out at a neighbor's and called me and the cops. Cops got there before I did and couldn't actually arrest him for anything but basically said he should duck off to somewhere else or we will find a reason to take you to jail. Good thing too, because if I got there first, I would probably gotten arrested for kicking his ass. A Facebook friend from high school got the COVID in April. They're home on oxygen now but need a lung transplant if they want to live more than a year. A friend of mine got shot with a firework. It exploded few milliseconds after impacting his stomach, ripping open his belly, breaking multiple ribs and nearly kill him. He recovered, but still had difficulties with everything, breathing, eating, whatever you normally do without thinking about it. The dude who shot him never got a penalty because there were not enough proof for each person that could have committed the crime. Sorry, missing word. But he lives. That is the most important thing. Their mother passed away suddenly at a pretty young age. Their father was already out of the picture for other reasons. They were strong but it was certainly hard on them. Where do I start? 7 concussions. Partial body paralyzation. Severe car crash. Out of work unable to drive for months. A couple seizures. 2nd-degree burns falling face first into a fire. I know there's more I'm forgetting. This all happened to the same guy in the span of like 4-5 years.